Shots Fired, How Ballistics Testimony Affects the Outcome of Criminal Cases by Alaina Suchsland. I'll start with the history. Ballistics is the study of evidence such as tool marks, firearms, and ammunition. Forensic ballistics includes three main sections: internal, external, and terminal. Internal ballistics is everything that happens inside the gun after the trigger is pulled. This is the interaction between the bullet, gunpowder, and the firing pin. External ballistics is after the bullet leaves the barrel. Its path can be affected by factors such as air resistance, gravity, and wind. Terminal ballistics is when the bullet strikes a target, whether that's when it comes into contact with a surface or a person, causes wound to a person. One of the most important parts of ballistics is firearm identification, which is using comparisons to determine if the bullet came from a specific gun. The rifling inside the barrel of the gun pushes against the bullet as it leaves, causing these striations that are referred to as fingerprints due to their uniqueness. Dr. Calvin Goddard is considered to be the pioneer of forensic ballistics. He helped develop the comparison microscope that allowed the viewing of the test bullet and the bullet from the scene at the same time. He, along with John Fisher and Philip Garble, created the Bureau of Forensic Ballistics in New York City. More recently, 3D technology is playing a major role in crime scene documentation. Triangulation is a technique involving multiple lasers at different angles to create these 3D models. A red laser is projected onto an object at a calibrated distance, and the camera measures the reflection of the object. These measurements become the 3D scan, which the software compiles to make a 3D digital reconstruction. One of these software packages that converts these scans into models is Zone 3. This is an example of a scan. Another way that the 3D technology is implemented is during autopsies. Post-mortem computed tomography scanning allows the imaging of body parts that are not normally looked at during autopsies, such as the skull, hands, and feet. A study showed that pathologists who had no experience looking at these scans were able to determine relatively accurately what injuries the person had and their possible cause of death. These scans also allowed for the visualization of projectiles and bullet paths through the victim to determine their posture at the time of death. Prior to 3D technology, reconstruction was primarily two-dimensional. The first is the lead-in method, where the impact of the bullet is used to determine the angle of incidence. This is the angle for the direction that the bullet was traveling before it came into contact with the surface. This lead-in mark establishes the entry side of the ricochet mark, which determines what direction the bullet came from. On this picture, the more round side, on the left side, is where the bullet initially struck the surface. The second is the manual ellipse method, which is much more math-based. The length and width of the bullet impact is measured by calipers, a tool with two movable jaws. These measurements are then used in the inverse sine function to find the direction that the bullet came from. The final method is the probing method. This is what most people think of when they think of bullet trajectory analysis. This is where 2-foot metal or fiberglass rods are inserted into the bullet's impact and secured with trajectory cones. Through a combination of elevation, vertical, and azimuth, horizontal angles, the bullet's impact angles can be determined. This helps determine the approximate location and position of the shooter. Of these three methods, the probing method is more accurate at a wider variety of angles. It does become less accurate at shallower angles relative to the surface the bullet strikes, where the other two methods are more accurate. Gunshot wounds on or in a victim's body help the investigator determine what happened at the scene of the crime. The most common shapes of these wounds are circular, eccentric, D-shaped, and star-shaped. Entrance wounds are usually round with a circle of abrasion where the bullet hit the skin. If the bullet enters perpendicular to the skin, it is called concentric or circular, which is the picture on the left side on the top. And if the bullet enters at any other angle, it is called eccentric, meaning the ring is thicker on one side compared to the other, which is the other picture up there. If travels after it leaves the gun or goes through another target is called atypical because the wound is D-shaped instead of circular. Another example of an atypical wound is when a gun is fired in contact with a bony part of the body. The gases from the muzzle of the gun cause the skin to expand and rip in a star-shaped pattern. These wounds are also darker because everything that comes out of the gun with the bullet has nowhere to go, and that's the picture on the bottom. Exit wounds can be any shape but are commonly round, oval, slit-like, or crescent, but they're not necessarily larger than the entrance wound. The main difference between the entrance and exit wounds is that exit wounds do not have a circle of abrasion margin around them. In the picture, the main difference is on the entrance wound, the bullet enters smoothly, and on the exit wound, it rips the skin apart more aggressively. Some exit wounds will look like an entrance wound in special cases, such as a reinforced exit wound, which is where the skin is supported by a hard object, such as a belt or a wall, or a star-shaped exit wound, which comes from rifle ammunition. Gunpowder particles and the pattern of abrasion around the wound helps to indicate the range at which a gun was fired. Contact range firing is when the muzzle of a gun is in direct contact with the victim's skin when it was discharged. Many internal injuries happen between the entrance and the exit wounds, caused by the path of the bullet and its kinetic energy. According to the formula for kinetic energy, which is 1/2 times mass times velocity squared, increasing the velocity is more impactful than increasing the mass because the velocity is an exponential quantity. So a bigger bullet does not always mean it will cause more damage. Sometimes the speed is the more important factor. The location that the bullet strikes the victim is also very important because a wound to the central nervous system is potentially much more serious than the same shot to a person's arm. Many departments across the United States are learning how vital national databases are to solving crimes. One of these databases is called the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, or NIBIN, and it was created by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. This network provides results of the potential matches within 48 hours of the evidence being presented. Bullets and shell casings are very important because the barrel of the gun leaves unique scratches, grooves, and dents, which can be used to link the gun and the bullet. The casing of the bullet also gets a mark from the firing pin, as the gunpowder is ignited, referred to as the firearm's fingerprint. Currently, Arkansas, Delaware, and New Jersey require police departments to enter casings and guns into the database whether the crime was solved or not. At one point in time, bullets and casings were not seen as important pieces of evidence, but now officers take the time to collect them from nonviolent shootings in hopes that they will solve violent crimes in the future. The collection of these casings and bullets gives the database more entries to work with using the standard of comparison, which is comparing a known sample to an unknown sample. This means that the test bullets fired from the lab is the known sample, and the bullet recovered from the scene is the unknown sample. Prior to the technological advancement of the database, firearms examiners used Polaroid photos of the casings to compare and review evidence. Today, the database uses 2D and 3D images which can be filtered through to produce results in minutes compared to days with the old method. An older case involving the use of IBIS, the local counterpart of NIBIN, comes from Illinois. Patrick Pursley was convicted of a murder of Andy Ursher during a robbery in Rockford, Illinois in 1993. Pursley maintained his innocence despite spending over 2 decades in prison. He advocated for himself from prison and convinced Illinois lawmakers to pass a law that would allow evidence from his case to be re-examined using the new system, which was the Integrated Ballistic Identification System. This system uses high-resolution, multi-dimensional images in its analysis, which matches the shell casings to the guns they were ejected from. Typically, this technology is used to convict criminals of crimes, and Illinois is the only state that grants use of this technology during the post-conviction appeals process. During Persley's original trial, the only physical evidence presented by the prosecution was the casing and the gun. Their version of the story was that Persley killed Asher while he was sitting in his car with his girlfriend. Persley's girlfriend said that he had committed the crime, but later recanted her statement and admitted her testimony was coerced by police. According to Persley's girlfriend's testimony, the person who killed Asher was wearing a ski mask and gloves, but none of that was used as evidence. The expert witness who testified in this case persuaded the jury that the marks on the bullets in the casings could only be from Persley's gun. Daniel Gunnell was the expert witness in this case, and during the retrial, he stated that he wouldn't have testified the same way today due to the technological advancements. Although IBIS is a much better system to examine this type of ballistic evidence, it can only produce high confidence matches, and the judge ruled that in this case, the result is enough to cast doubts on the expert witness's testimony. Persley knew this evidence was his best chance at exoneration because the software would not be biased against him. Since his release on bail, Persley has been speaking at higher education institutions in Illinois about wrongful convictions and gang violence. He also started a nonprofit organization which encourages young people to go to college instead of pursuing a life of crime. One more recent case study comes from Phoenix, Arizona. Cleopas Cooksey was arrested by police on December 17, 2017, at the scene of his mother and stepfather's murders for a double homicide. The investigators who worked this case believe Cooksey's first murders occurred on November 27, 2017. In Phoenix, and the victims were Andrew Remillard and Parker Smith. The next murder was 5 days later, and the victim was Salim Richards, who witnesses claim Cooksey knew. Jesus Bonifacio was killed in Glendale 6 days later and was Cooksey's ex-girlfriend's brother. 2 days later, also in Glendale, LaTorre Beckford was killed. Another 2 days later, Christopher Cameron was killed in Glendale after a drug trade went wrong. Later that same day, Maria Villanueva was kidnapped in Phoenix and her body was found the next day. The final murders were 2 days later in Phoenix, and the victims were Renee Cooksey and Edward Gunn. His victims were of multiple races, both genders, and there was not one specific age range that he targeted. Niven played a large role in this case because it was the connection between the early murders and the later ones. Casings were entered from Phoenix, Avondale, and Glendale, where the database determined that they were shot from the same gun. At the local level, each department had entered their evidence into their IBIS system, which feeds into NIBIN because it is the national database, and that's how the matches were confirmed. After the connections were made, the police realized that they had stumbled upon a new type of serial killer. Cooksey represents a new type of serial killer who does not wait very long between victims because they know they are more likely to be caught. Law enforcement puts pressure on people who are serial offenders so they feel the need to squeeze more crimes into a smaller amount of time. This can also negatively impact the offender because they're more likely to slip out without proper planning, making it easier for police to catch them. Before his murder spree, Cooksey spent 16 years in prison for manslaughter and armed robbery. He was released in July of 2017, although he had over 20 disciplinary infractions during his sentence. Some of these included assault of prison staff, fighting, and disorderly conduct. Although the casings were important pieces of evidence in this case, Phoenix police admit they were not the only evidence that led to his arrest. They also collected cell phone records, DNA, and a victim's jewelry to find the connection between Cooksey and the other murders. This historical method of forensic evidence is not without critiques. Two Baltimore attorneys challenged the long-standing idea of comparing a bullet from a crime scene to its test bullet fired from the alleged weapon. One of the attorneys, Brian Zemmel, looked deeper into the legitimacy of ballistic testing and found no evidence of scientific support. The main type of ballistic analysis is referred to as pattern matching technique, which is when the bullet from the scene is compared to the test bullet under a microscope. The theory behind this is that the marks on the bullet are unique from the gun it was fired from. Zemmel's concern is that no scientific measurements match the gun and the bullet, meaning it could be a different gun from a different there's alternative ballistic analysis technique called consecutive matching striae technique. This method is quantitative, meaning it uses a number threshold to rule out other guns instead of identifying a match. Dover v. Merrill Dell Pharmaceuticals was one of the cases that set the standard for admission of expert evidence by determining that it was not only relevant, but also reliable. Judges use testability, peer reviews, error rates, standards and controls, and general acceptance to consider the scientific validity of expert testimony. In many other cases, forensic evidence such as fingerprints and tool mark identification have been the basis of a case, but were not able to show the reliability of their techniques. Many authors think that there's a strong connection between invalid forensic science testimony, wrongful convictions, and more cases being correctly decided if there was a standard that needed to be met for the evidence to be considered reliable. Some judges have interpreted this ruling in different ways, but many still trust the old forensic evidence due to how long it's been around. The reliability of forensic evidence still faces criticism after these major decisions because a decent amount of it does not meet evidentiary standards. Most judges excluded this evidence due to concerns about the underlying theory, methodology, but they might be more confident if it was required to be explained in a certain way. Today, the technology is better and faster than ever, so many different disciplines are testing what it can do for them. In the realm of forensic ballistics, these technologies are being used to speed up the evidence process. The use of artificial intelligence is the ability of a system to correctly interpret external data, learn from the data, and use it to achieve specific goals through flexible adaptation. Algorithms are instructions that computers follow to solve a problem or complete a task. Both of these systems can be used for forensics to analyze data, recognize patterns, identify anomalies, and provide suggestions based on provided data. These computer programs can be very helpful while comparing evidence because they work very quickly. These technologies can be used to predict where gunpowder and shell casings will be within a crime scene. They also compare trace evidence in a database with image processing without human involvement. Some algorithms have the knowledge to determine the class and caliber of the weapon from the forensic evidence found at the scene. These technologies can be used in crime scene reconstruction if they are given data. They can analyze evidence from pictures at the crime scene and create video animations. This makes the job of the forensic scientist easier because they do not have to manually create a reconstruction. AI is not a replacement for human expertise, but can be used as a partner because this technology is so new, it is not allowed to be admitted into court as evidence. These technologies can be used to enhance the criminal justice system, but they will likely not replace it anytime soon. As previously mentioned, another technology that has been implemented at many departments across the country is 3D imaging. These models are used to represent the victim's proportions at the time of the accident and are even able to incorporate data from a two-dimensional photo to represent height and other measurements. When these models are created, they allow an investigator to see the crime scene without actually having to be physically there. They are also useful in court when describing what happened at the time of the accident. Three-dimensional models can be used in bullet trajectory and crash investigations because they allow for a deeper investigation of the crime scene. They also allow the person to see the scene from different angles that would not normally be possible. To summarize, the existing literature shows how far ballistic evidence technology has advanced from the use of microscopes to renderings of 3D scans. The trajectory analysis and injury patterns assist in describing to the investigator what happened. The case studies are very important because they show the impact of national databases on the ability to correctly solve more crimes. In the case of Patrick Pursley, he was able to have ballistic evidence from his original case re-examined due to the advancements in technology. Many people who have been falsely accused do not have the same opportunity, but they deserve to have a second chance. In the Cooksey case, the database was used to connect murders in different cities in Arizona. The casings from the last murders were compared to all the other casings, and it was found that he had committed all 9 murders. The police found a serial killer without intentional looking for one. Recently, artificial intelligence and algorithms have been implemented to analyze data, recognize patterns, and identify anomalies. These technologies can streamline the process of comparing ballistic evidence from a crime scene to the stored data in the database. They make it much easier and faster to sift through evidence. Forensic ballistics has a long history of assisting and solving crimes and will continue for many years in the future.